We are talking about the different types of classroom settings that your child could be assigned to and what's the right placement for your child. My name is Carrie Woodward. I'm a Board Certified Behavior Analyst, and I've been working with children with autism and in the special education setting for over 20 years. First, let's sort of define our terms. A general education placement is often referred to as mainstream or inclusion, and this looks like your typical second grade classroom. The learners in this type of classroom are about grade level. They are doing the curriculum-based work for their grade. The teacher is most likely a credentialed general education teacher or has like a general education credential. There are general education teachers that have additional credentials, but that's not a necessity for a general education teacher. These tend to be larger classrooms with bigger groups of kids, has a larger ratio of adult to child. And sometimes, depending on the school, you could have up to 30 to 40 children in one class with a teacher and maybe an aide. Separately, you have what we call a special education classroom or a specialized academic instruction classroom. And this is going to be a classroom designed for students that have special needs, which can include autism. Your teacher is going to be a special education credentialed teacher, which is either a credential that's mild moderate or moderate severe, which essentially means that the teacher has specialized instruction on working with students that have mild to moderate or moderate to severe needs. These are going to be smaller classrooms, fewer children, a much lower child to adult ratio, meaning that there are a lot more adults in the classroom. Some children may have a one-on-one aide, so there would be an adult per child. Some have a 2-to-1 where they have 2 children to 1 adult, but in general there are a lot more adult supports in a special education classroom than in a mainstream or a general education classroom. So which is the right setting for your child? Well, it's unique to every child, which is the beauty of an individualized education plan. And if you're not familiar with your IEP yet, I did a video all about what are IEPs and how to do your first one. You can see that video here. So the IEP meeting is the time for everybody in your child's IEP team to discuss what's going to be the right placement for your child. Essentially, where are they going to get the biggest benefit? Back in the day, anybody who had special needs was sort of segregated from the rest of the school population. They even had schools devoted to supporting children with special needs. But it also meant that these kids were completely separated from the other peers on the school. And as they looked at including some of these special education peers into mainstream or general education classrooms, they noted that there was not only a benefit for the special education student, but there also was benefit to the general education students as well. There was a study that looked at including a mixture of special education and general education students in a preschool setting and found that both the general education and special education peers benefited from this arrangement. The special education students benefit from being in a general education setting because they have neurotypical peers that are modeling what they should be doing, whether that's sitting on the rug appropriately, looking up at the teacher as they're reading a story, putting the things away after you're done cleaning up. So you have really great peer models that are demonstrating what the special education students should be doing. On the flip side, general education students are gaining so much patience, kindness, compassion from being exposed to students who are different. I think we could all benefit from spending time with people who are different from us to learn how we can be a better friend, how we can be a better support, how we can be helpful. And so there's really a benefit to allowing special education and general education students to spend time together. So there is this federal regulation called least restrictive. And this essentially means that we want students placed in the least restrictive placement for them. If they can hang in a general education setting and they can benefit in the general education setting, we want them in the general education setting. So there's this very large push to make sure that every single student has general education opportunities. It's actually a part of the IEP. They have to have opportunities for mainstreaming with general education peers. However, some parents tend to push for more inclusion than is beneficial to the student. Some parents don't understand that there is so much benefit that can be gained in a special education classroom and that benefit slowly goes away as they are fully included into a general education setting. I see in my practice that this benefit is very high earlier in the educational process. So you're looking at preschool, kindergarten, maybe first grade, where as much inclusion as possible is super beneficial for our special education students. As the general education curriculum begins to become more complex, more advanced, more difficult, I see that the benefit starts to fade and also can be actually detrimental to our special education students if they're spending too much time in a mainstream setting where they're not actually getting to learn the material. As students get older, they absolutely still need to have time where they are mainstreaming with general education peers. I tend to see the benefit being more in social opportunities. So during PE time, during music time, during library time, during lunch and recess. Some schools have great social skills groups during lunch and recess that kids can participate in. And these are perfect opportunities for kids to spend time with their general education peers if the general education curriculum is no longer benefiting their placement in the general education classroom during academic time. The reason that applied behavior analysis, or ABA, works so well with autistic children is that their brains tend to need more repetition in order to grasp a concept. Sometimes it can be 2 or 3 times, sometimes it can be 5, 10, 20, 50 times to really grasp a concept. And what's not happening in a general education setting is a slowdown and a repeating of the concepts. So it's a moving at a very fast pace in a general education setting. And so when you have an autistic child who requires a little bit slower instruction and a bit more repetition, they're not getting that in the general education classroom. And so what happens is that the curriculum continues to advance and advance and advance. And if your special education student is still looking on concept A, but the class is working on concept F, then the gap begins to continue to widen every week. One of the main markers that we use to evaluate learning for children with special needs is the number of learning opportunities that they get with a specific skill. So when you think about in a special education classroom where it's completely designed around supporting the learning style of somebody with special needs, there may be 25 opportunities presented in a 10-minute span. This means that, let's say we're working on letters and letter recognition. We can work at our own pace because we have a smaller group. You have individual time with a one-on-one support. You have individual time with a special education teacher. And we can go through 20 different opportunities to work on practicing letter recognition. If you move that into a general education classroom, they're maybe getting 1 or 2 learning opportunities during that same time. The pace moves much more quickly, there's less repetition. So in the same chunk of time, a student could be getting 25 learning opportunities, or they could be getting 2 learning opportunities. So when you're looking at how much learning is actually happening for my child throughout the day, a really great question to ask your IEP team is, how many learning opportunities are they getting throughout the day? This is something that can easily be tracked, and it would give you an idea of the more beneficial setting for your student. In addition to thinking about learning opportunities and just the number of opportunities your child is having to learn throughout the day, you have to also look at how does your student feel in each of these different settings. I have worked with students who feel very frustrated in an academic setting where the content is very difficult and they don't have the prerequisite skills to grasp the content. So they get bored. They engage in higher rates of self-stimulatory behavior because they can't access the content. They may try to act out or be disruptive to try to escape the environment because it's frustrating or they don't understand. So it's not always beneficial to have our kids included at the highest level if we see that it's not benefiting them and that they are struggling. We have to also take into account how our children are feeling. Sometimes they can articulate and they can tell us, that's really frustrating, I don't like that, it's too hard. But sometimes they can't articulate that. For our kids who are less verbal, we have to watch for signals that they are distressed, that they're frustrated, that they're not enjoying the work. And we have to make best judgments based on that because we can't outrightly ask them how they're feeling. But the inverse is also true. If you have a student who's almost fully in a specialized academic instruction classroom and has very little time in a mainstream classroom, but they could benefit from more mainstream, we need to advocate and fight for that. So there's 2 different ways you can look at it. And one is your kid's too fully included and it's detrimental to their learning, or your kid is not included enough and it's detrimental to their learning. We need to find the right balance for each student and make sure that the IEP dictates the exact number of minutes and the exact times that your student is going to be spending in a general education or mainstream setting. Here's a few different scenarios. So let's take student A. Student A requires specialized academic instruction. That's their general placement. However, we have a parent who has done research and decided that the general education setting is the most appropriate place for this student, regardless of whether or not they are learning to their fullest potential. So you have a parent who has gone to every IEP and pushed for inclusion, and the school district has relented, despite them thinking that it's not in the student's best interest. Sometimes school districts will simply appease parents because they don't want to fight anymore, or a parent has brought an attorney and is threatening to sue. So you have a student that's fully included in a general education setting and may have what we call pull-out. Third classroom style is resource or learning center. And this is like a specialized academic instruction class, but kids come in for short periods of time to simply work on academic IEP goals. So if you have a student who's struggling with math and language arts, they may have pull-out resource time or pull-out learning center time to work one-on-one with a resource teacher or in a small group with a resource teacher on these specific academic goals. So you have student A, who is fully included, has opportunities for pull-out, essentially spends the full day in the general education setting. However, the content is very difficult. This may have worked in kindergarten, but now we are in 4th grade. And because we have never mastered any of those lower level skills, because we just never had enough learning opportunities to fully master it, the student continues to advance with the curriculum, but doesn't have any of the foundational prerequisite skills to actually complete the work independently. So everything is fully 100% prompted. This can be very tricky to determine whether or not our student is in the right placement, because if you have a one-on-one aide who is fully prompting a student through the work and the work gets submitted, then the teacher and the parent might look at the work and say, hey, the student can totally do this work. So we have to be very careful that we are requesting that one-on-one aides, paraprofessionals, aides that have been assigned to our student are indicating on the work how much prompting is required for the student to complete the work. At IEPs, you may have teachers presenting goals every year where the student doesn't meet the goals because there's just not enough opportunities to address the goals and work on them in a meaningful way. And yet you have a parent who continues to push because they feel like the general education is the best setting for that child. Now, ultimately, it's a parent's decision where they want to have their child. But we all want to make sure that parents are informed and can see that it's not always the case that general education is the most appropriate setting for a student. Let's take student B, who is fully in a specialized academic instruction classroom. And at a young age, it's obvious to a lot of people that this student could actually benefit from being in a general education setting for a lot of the academic work. He is highly social. He is almost on par with where the academic curriculum is in the general education setting. So the parents fight to have the inclusion more of a percentage of the day. So when we look at mainstream versus special ed setting, in the IEP, it's often referred to as a percent. So a certain number of minutes or a percentage of the day where the student is going to be mainstreamed. As a parent, you also need to be very aware of whether or not your student could benefit from more inclusion. And again, go to the IEP, call an IEP, and request that we increase the time. You can always ask for the data. You can always request that if a school is fighting you on having your student more included, ask for the data that supports that decision. Why would the student not benefit? Can we do a trial period and have the student spend more time, and we can take data to see how they're doing in the general education setting? So it doesn't always have to be one way or the other. It's unique to the student, and we need to be very careful about pushing one way or the other without the supportive data to justify their placement. So here's a totally different example where we have a student who has done a really great job of sort of splitting the difference between mainstream and special education. And the student is benefiting. They're doing really well in both settings. But now we are in high school. And some of the general education classes that the student is in are very, very hard. Math that is advanced, language arts that is advanced, science, social studies, concepts that are incredibly difficult. We have to also remember to ask our student what they think or how they feel. If your student has the words to express it, ask them. If your student doesn't have the words to express it, watch for the cues that they're not in the right placement. So we had a student who was visibly upset every single day in a specific class in the general education setting, crying, trying to escape, avoiding homework, avoiding tasks. The parents continued to fight for that placement, and yet we kept telling the parent, we know that this is not the right placement because our student is feeling frustrated. Our student is not wanting to be in this placement. So again, not only as the parent do you need to request the data, make sure that everybody that's on the IEP team is working together to get your student in the right placement for the right amount of time, but we have to also ask the student, and their input on where they are, what they're learning, what they're doing. So the moral of the story is this: there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for whether or not mainstream or special education is right for your student. Every student is individual, every student is unique, and they're going to have a unique program designed for them that is going to maximize their potential. The problem is that you need to be informed as a parent. You need to make sure you understand how they're performing in each of these different settings. And sometimes we need to take a step back and reevaluate what we are fighting hard for, whether or not that actually is in our students' best interest. If you have a home ABA program and your student is preschool aged, you might want to consider putting your child in a preschool that would allow an ABA agency to come in with your student. Preschool, again, is when I feel like it's the most beneficial to have a fully included setting for a student. A lot of times the special education preschool settings will not allow outside agencies to come in and help support a student. However, if your home ABA program has goals that could be addressed in the school setting, peer goals, social interaction goals, group goals that you're not able to do in a one-on-one setting in the home environment, you could absolutely justify the use of those home hours in the school setting if you're in a preschool setting that would allow you to have the ABA agency come in. This, I feel like, is the most beneficial because what it does is it's strengthening all of these foundational learning skills so that when your student does advance to kindergarten, we have already set the stage for them to be successful in kindergarten. We've already worked a lot on some of these core foundational classroom readiness skills. Sitting in a group, following group instructions, being able to sit in one place for a long time, looking up at the teacher, all of these foundational skills that are going to help the student learn in future settings are sort of solidified in a preschool environment. So if you have the ability to use a home ABA program hour in the school setting, I would highly encourage you to look into that and talk to your ABA agency about it. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'd be happy to respond. And we look forward to bringing you more value with each and every video.